You know, fear is a part of life. Everyone gets afraid sometimes. It's completely normal. It's natural. And most of the time, there really is nothing to be afraid of. Most of the time, it really is just the wind. But not all the time. We know that in this world there are creepy things. There are strange people and strange places. And some of the strangest ones are the ones that seem completely normal, like the city where I live, Berkeley. This story actually happened at a Valentine's Day party to a friend of my brother's. And it was at a fraternity at UC Berkeley. Valentine's Day was their big bash. This guy's name was Al, and he loved to party. He went to this party, he had a great time, and he sang and he danced, and it must have been about 3 in the morning. He was about ready to call it a night when he looked across the room, and he saw a woman he'd never seen before. And he found her rather interesting, so he walked over to introduce himself to her, and they talked for a while. Her name was Karen, and after a time talking, she looked at her watch and said, "Oh my goodness, it's time for me to go. Do you have a phone I could use to call a cab?" He said, "Well, why do you need to call a cab?" She said, "Well, you see, I walked here from my home, but now it's pouring outside." And sure enough, the rain was just coming down in buckets outside. And Al said, "Well, whereabouts do you live?" She said, "I live over near the corner of Cedar and Milvey in that old gray house." He said, "Hey, I know the one. I have a new car. I'll give you a ride." But she said, "It's so cold. Can I borrow your jacket?" So he gave her the jacket, went out to the car, started to drive on down Bancroft Avenue, and he was driving towards Telegraph. And suddenly, coming up Telegraph, with no lights on, was a long black car. And it was coming right towards them. And as he looked at it, he panicked. And he froze, and he did not hit the brake. And the car was coming right towards them, and she reached down and grabbed the emergency brake and pulled as hard as she could. And the car they were in screeched to a halt, and that black car, running through the red light, swerved and missed them by inches, and then sped off into the night. Now, I don't know if anything like this has ever happened to you. I hope it doesn't. But when it does, you don't have time to be afraid before, so you get afraid afterwards. And afterwards, he was shaking. And he drove the rest of the way to her house at 5 miles an hour. And when he finally got there, he said, "Look, I'm really sorry about that. I hope you're okay." And as he turned to look at her, there was no one there. The seat was empty. The house was completely dark. He thought, what is this, some kind of dream? He turned the car around, drove back, and went back to sleep. And by the next day, he'd pretty well convinced himself that it was a dream. Until late in the day, when the picture of her kept running through his mind, and finally, he had to find out. So he drove his car back out to that house, knocked on the door, and an older man answered. "Yes. Excuse me, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I met a girl at a party last night. I really liked her, and we were having a good time, and I was giving her a ride home, and suddenly she disappeared." The man nodded. He said, "I know. That was my daughter, Karen. She was killed 10 years ago last night on the way home from a Valentine's Day party. And every year since then, someone comes and tells me the same story. They're giving her a ride home from the party, but they never make it past the intersection of Telegraph and Bancroft." Al looked at him and said, "But I saw her. She was real." The man said, "I know it's hard to believe. She's buried in the graveyard up near Tilden Park. Karen Hawkins was her name." He said, "I know that graveyard. I have an uncle buried there." He drove to that graveyard, and sure enough, he found her grave. And on her grave was his jacket. There's something spooky about cars. Always. I think that when we look for spooky things, we find two things that stand out: cars and toilets. I think every child has a fear of toilets, and maybe we don't know it, but every adult has a fear of cars. I know that when I was a kid, we had a great old car. It was a Dodge Dart, a 1964 Dodge Dart, white with red interior. And it was a great car. It was a great car partly because it ran really well on zero maintenance. I don't think we ever changed the oil in that thing. And it was partly great because it had a hole in the back floor. I have two older brothers, and we all used to sit in the back seat. And there was a little hole in the back floor about the size of a quarter. And you could look through that hole and see the street. Now, normally, if you're just walking along and see the street, it's not a big deal. But to see it through the hole of the floor in a moving car, that's cool. And you could see puddles and oil slicks and all sorts of stuff. And you could drop stuff down there, and that's what we did. We put little pieces of paper and we dropped them down there, and we took pencils and things and broke them up and dropped them down there. I think our parents were always surprised at how clean the back part of the car was. Usually when you have kids, it's not so clean. But because we dropped everything we did. And we used to fight over who got to sit by this hole. Now, understand, our parents didn't really know about the hole. They knew there was a hole there, and they put the mat over it. They said, leave the mat over the hole. And we always would sort of wrestle among ourselves to get the seat by the hole, and then drop stuff down. When we ran out of stuff to drop down, we started to pick away at the hole, and it got a little bigger till it was about the size of a softball. And I remember one time I had won the right to sit there, and I was very pleased because I was the youngest and I didn't often get the right to sit by the hole. And so I was dropping out everything I could, and pretty much had dropped out everything and was on the verge of dropping out some of my dad's important business papers when I thought, no, I better not do that. But I had a box of jujubes. You know jujubes? Yeah. Jujubes, I've never understood, because you chew them and nothing happens. I think they're actually plastic. And if you weren't to swallow it, you could keep one for your whole life there. Anyway, so I was dropping these boxes of jujubes down there, and, one at a time, just to watch them go, sort of like Hansel leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. And I was doing it very absent-mindedly because I was getting bored. I was about halfway through this box, and suddenly a hand reached up from under the car, grabbed the jujubes, and took them away. I took the little floor mat, covered up the hole, and said, okay, I'm done. Who wants to sit by the hole now? I called up my brother the other day. I have an older brother in Los Angeles who's a cab driver. And I told him I was interested in ghost stories. He said, ghost stories? He said, last week I heard about a horrible ghost in Hawaii. I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. What was that? He said, there's a really horrible, awful ghost. I said, well, what does it do? It's a ghost that haunts cab drivers. All the cab drivers in Honolulu know this ghost, and it scares them terribly. What happens? You're driving your cab along, and you see her hailing your cab. And if you pick her up and take her to where she's going, she puts a horrible curse on your cab. And on the very next trip you make, you die in a horrible accident. I said, wow, that's bad. I bet no one picks her up. He said, no, that's the thing. If you don't pick her up, then she gets angry. And she places a horrible curse on your cab. And on the very next trip you make, you die in a horrible accident. I said, Nat, that's a no-win situation. He said, I told you, it's a horrible ghost. The folks in Hong Kong see death as a part of life. And it's a very active, busy part of life. There's all sorts of things. In fact, as you go through the streets of Hong Kong, sometimes you see a little death store. And you can walk in, and what you see there are little beautifully made wooden houses, small cars, little boats, and these are all things that you buy and you burn for your dead ancestors, because they believe the way to give gifts to your relatives and ancestors who've died is to burn them in their honor, and then they'll receive them in the world of the dead. And they have all sorts of things in these shops you can buy. You can even buy little swimming pools to burn for the dead. I don't know how you burn swimming pools. I didn't figure that part out. But they also have money, hell money. it's called. And it comes in denominations of $1,000,000 bills. And you get just stacks of them. You know, there must be a lot of inflation in the afterlife, now that I think about it. But you take it and you burn it, and then your relatives get rich. I got some hell money when I was in Hong Kong. And the way it happened was like this. I was going to the racetrack in Happy Valley. And in Hong Kong, to get anywhere, you take a taxi cab. They're quick, they're easy, they're pretty cheap. They're little red cars, zip all over this island, and they get you there very fast. So I was trying to catch a taxi cab to Happy Valley. And I hailed a cab, as I always did, and I said to the cab driver, Happy Valley. And he looked at me and sped off. I thought, well, that's rude. And the next cab driver came, and I said, Happy Valley. He looked at me, and he sped off. A third one did the same thing. And finally, I was getting a little angry about this. I got a beat-up old cab to stop, and I got in first. By now, it was late. It was about 8 o'clock, and I climbed in the back seat of the car, said, just go. And he started going, and when we were already on our way, I said, Happy Valley, please. And the man in the front seat said, okay, and drove. And when we were well on our way there, I said, look, what is the deal with cab drivers here in Happy Valley? And he said, oh, maybe you don't know the story about Happy Valley. I said, no, but I like stories. He said, oh, and Happy Valley is the racetrack. The racetrack has been there many years, but it didn't always look like it looks now. It used to be made of bamboo, and it happened many years ago that there was a terrible fire. And the fire spread through the stands of the racetrack, and because it was wood, they burned. Thousands of people were killed. It was the worst fire in the history of Hong Kong, and that happened many years ago on this evening. Oh, I see. And what the cab drivers say is this, that one day a year, the dead who were killed in that fire come back, but they have to be back in time for that fire again. And to get back, of course, they take cabs. I see. And if you pick up one of the dead people and drive them, you turn your car around the corner and you come into a wall of flame. I see. I see why cab drivers don't pick up people, but what about you? He said, what do I have to fear? Here we are. We got there, and I looked at the meter. It was expensive, but I brought out a big bill, paid him, and he counted out several bills in change, and he turned to give them to me, and as he did, he said, you know, a driver like me can make some real money on a night like tonight. And as he looked at me, I saw his face, and the skin was completely burnt off. Likewise, his hand, there was no skin at all to be seen there, and his mouth was smiling, but I looked in his eyes, and his eyes were just black, empty sockets. I tell you, I grabbed that handful of bills and ran out of that cab and began working very quickly to convince myself that I'd imagined this, because I have an active imagination, you know, and pretty well convinced myself of that for a couple days. And then I went out one day for dim sum, and the waiter came with the bill, and when I paid the bill, he took the money, he turned around, he walked back, and said, what is this? You making some kind of joke? I said, no, it's the bill. He said, you have to pay with real money. You can't pay with this money, this hell money. And the words of the cab driver came back to me. A guy like me can make some real money on a night like tonight. Many of you know my longtime friend and pet, and that would be Bill the chicken. He's a rubber chicken, and I've had him since I was in 4th grade. And this is the story of how I got Bill the chicken. Now, first I have to explain that when I was in 4th grade, I was scared of things. The doorbell would ring, I'd go, ah! Mailman, come on! Things just frightened me. Things that shouldn't have been scary frightened me. I'd see movies that terrified me. The Sound of Music. You know that part where they say, the hills are alive? Gave me nightmares. And I wanted to be like my friend Dirk. Dirk was the coolest kid in all of 4th grade. Now, granted, he'd had 3 years of 4th grade to practice at it. But he was so cool. And he used to say, Joel, your problem is that you are a chicken. I said, but Dirk, don't you ever get afraid? He said, man, I don't know the meaning of the word fear. This in itself wasn't impressive because there were lots of words Dirk didn't know the meaning of. And I would try to help him along and make sure that he understood. But he said, you don't get the point, man. You are a chicken. But Dirk, don't things ever scare you? Like, supposing you go to a movie and you see a movie about some strange mad scientist. Doesn't that scare you a little bit? Mad scientists are stupid. All right. What about Count Dracula, who comes and goes, blah, blah, blah? Count Dracula's really stupid. What about the Wolfman? The Wolfman's dumb. Dirk loved to call everything either stupid or dumb. He called me stupid and dumb, but I wanted to be around Dirk because Dirk was so cool and so tough. I wanted to be cool and tough like Dirk. Dirk could open Coke bottles with his teeth. Everyone was very impressed except his orthodontist, who thought it was about the stupidest thing he had ever seen, but Dirk was cool that way. I once saw him take a rock and break it on his head. I don't know why. And he said, don't call me Dirk, call me Dirt, because I'm tough. And he was tough, and I wasn't. And he was bigger than me, and I wanted to be like him. And one day, I remember it was getting close towards Halloween. We were sort of building up our tolerance for fear. And he said, hey, Joel, why don't we go in the greenhouse? I said, well, a couple reasons. For one, it's haunted. He said, yeah, and you're chicken, right? I said, well, yeah, but I'll go in there if you'll go with me. Yeah, right. Now, the greenhouse was at the end of our street. And it was across a long vacant lot filled with weeds. And way in the back, and no one ever lived there. It was called the greenhouse because it was painted green. And so it was after school one day that we hiked through the weeds of this lot around the back of this house and crept in through the back door. And I walked through a long hallway with rooms on either side. And I said, Dirk, you're not going to leave me, are you? He said, I'm right here. I'm right behind you, okay? Good. You're right there, aren't you, Dirk? Yeah, I'm right behind you, okay? Okay, Dirk, as long as you're there, okay? Dirk? I looked back and he was gone. I thought, Dirk, don't do this to me. And there were doors on either side he could have gone into. And I had no idea where he was. And I thought I should run out, but I thought I should find him because what if something happened to Dirk? And I went straight ahead, and there was a door with kind of misted glass on it. I saw a figure in it. I thought, that must be Dirk. I opened the door. It wasn't Dirk. It was a man with a knife. And he was holding the knife high above his head, and he was cutting a loaf of bread. And he looked at me and said, ah! What are you doing? I said, what are you doing? Put down that knife. He said, all right, but I was making myself a sandwich. I said, are you a ghost? No, I'm not a ghost. My name's Arthur Green. I live here. This is my house. And who are you, young man? Uh-oh. You live here? Then I'm a trespasser. My name's Joel. Well, Joel, what are you doing in my house? Gee, I'm sorry. I guess I'll be going now. I must be lost. Bye. I had no idea anyone lived there. And as I was about to go, who should enter but Dirk? And I said, hey, Dirk, look who I found. It's Mr. Green. He lives here. Yeah, Mr. Green is stupid. I said, Dirk, he could have us arrested. I don't care. He's stupid. His house is stupid. I ain't afraid of Mr. Green. I ain't afraid of nothing. And Mr. Green said, wait a minute. Did I hear you say that you're not afraid of anything? I said I ain't afraid of nothing. Ah, then maybe you'd like to earn some money. Sure. What do I have to do? Mr. Green smiled. He took the knife and said, "You know that graveyard out by Gidley School?" "Yeah, I go to Gidley School. I know that." "You know there's one grave people don't go near. The one with the broken gravestone? Well, what they say is there's a story behind that grave. That grave actually belonged to my great-great-great-uncle Silas Green, who was murdered. But the murderer was never found. And what they say is this: if you walk out towards that grave on a moonlit night, a hand will reach out from the grave, and it will reach up, and it will grab you and pull you in. Have you heard that story, Dirk?" "It's just a stupid story." I said, "Dirk, stories aren't stupid. Stories are really cool." He said, "Yeah, you're stupid too, Joel." Mr. Green said, "If you think it's just a story, then you could try this." He opened a drawer and pulled out 5 $10 bills. He put them down in front of Dirk and said, "Next Thursday night, after you're done with your trick-or-treating, go to that grave, take this knife, and stab it in. But you must do it without being afraid." "Hey, I am never afraid." No. I'll tell you what. Joel will go with you to make sure. Now, if you get afraid, Joel gets the money. So that was the deal. I had a chance to make $50. And that next Thursday was Halloween. We went around with our Halloween bags. We said, "Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat." And we went, got all our junk food, ate it. He went to his house. I went to my house. And usually my parents let me stay up late on Halloween, as late as I wanted. But about 11 o'clock, I said, "Well, I'm tired, going to bed now." Walked into my room and I waited. And that rain began to fall very heavily, so I got out my raincoat. My parents always bought me these big old yellow raincoats. I looked like a belle when I wore it. The idea was that I could wear the same raincoat for 3 years and eventually grow into it. About midnight, there's a knock on the window, and there's Dirk. And he had on his big yellow rain jacket too, and he had in one hand a flashlight, and in the other hand a knife. I climb out my window, and I walk down the street. Now this is Glickman Street, the same street I always walked down to go to school. Only now it was really dark. No streetlights then. And on either side of the street, I could see the old, withered, burning jack-o'-lanterns. Dirk kept saying, "I'm not afraid, I'm 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 not afraid." I said, "All right, Dirk, you're not afraid." He said, "Good, you just make sure I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid at all." All right. So we went through Gidley School, and the schoolyard was the same yard we played in each day, only now it was empty. We came to the graveyard on the other side. Dirk crawled through a hole in the fence. I stayed outside. I said, "Okay, Dirk, go stick the knife." And he said, "All right, just look at me so you know that I'm not afraid." By now the rain was pouring down and a wind was blowing. Thunder was booming in the sky. Lightning was flashing. And I said, "Come on, Dirk, just go. Do it. And he walked over to the grave and he said, okay, look." And he looked back at me and he said, Joel, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid." I said, "Dirk, if you're not afraid, why are you shaking so much?" He said, "I'm cold." Just then, thunder struck. Boom! He jumped. I said, "Dirk, why'd you jump?" He said, "It hit me, but I'm not afraid." He looked right at me and said, "I'm not afraid," and he stabbed that knife in the grave. And he got up to run, and he started to run, and his hands were moving, and his feet was moving, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't going anywhere. And I said, come on, Dirk, don't do this to me." And I remember he opened his mouth, he looked at me and said, "Ah!" and fell to the ground. That was all I had to see. I said, "Feet, come on, let's go, feet, run." My feet took me home faster than they'd ever carried me. I went right to my parents' room. I said, "Mom, Dad, wake up. A big monster. Came and got Dirk. It had orange hair, yellow teeth, green eyes, blue fangs. Oh, it was horrible. He said, "Joel, relax. You ate too much junk food." I said, No, I didn't. Big old honking monster got Dirk. It was terrible." My dad drove me out to the graveyard. And when the lights shone through the fence, he became very serious because there was Dirk's body lying on the ground. I couldn't look down. He said, "Is he dead, Dad?" And my dad looked down, and he said, "Have I ever told you about Franklin Delano Roosevelt?" I said, "Dad, why are you giving me a history lesson when Dirk is dead?" He said, "Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, 'There is nothing to fear but fear itself.'" I said, "Dad, Dirk is dead, isn't he?" "Your friend Dirk isn't dead. He was just afraid. And he was afraid to admit that sometimes he got scared." Looked down, and there I saw Dirk on the ground, and I saw that knife stuck through a corner of his jacket, pinning it to the ground. He had stabbed his jacket. And when he turned to run and couldn't move, he was too afraid to look back because he thought it was the thing. And he fainted. We scooped Dirk up, took him home, and the next day I was very happy. I went and I told the whole story to Mr. Green, and he laughed and he smiled and he counted out $50. That was back when $50 was a lot of money. And I looked at the money and I thought, oh, I should do something nice for Dirk. Should I give him half of it? No. I didn't think so either. But I thought, maybe I'll buy him a little gift. So I went to my favorite store and bought him a really nice gift. Had it gift wrapped and everything, brought it to him and said, here, Dirk, just to show there are no hard feelings. He said, I don't want your stupid gift. I said, Dirk, at least open it up to see what's in it. He said, I don't want it, it's stupid. And he gave it back. After that, Dirk and I stopped being friends. But the good news is that the gift became a very good friend and a good pet, even to this day. And that is the story of how I got Bill the chicken. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge. I cremated Sam McGee. Robert W. Service was Scottish and went to work up in the Yukon Territories, up in the coldest, most desolate part of Canada. And he started writing poems while he was up there. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the south to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say in his homely way that he'd sooner live in hell. On Christmas Day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close, then the lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes beneath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars o'erhead were dancing heel to toe, he turned to me and, Cap, says he, I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking you that you won't refuse my last request. Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of a moan, It's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold till I'm chilled clean through to the bone. Yet, 'tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear that, foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains. A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail. And we started on at the break of dawn, but God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee. And before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried, horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, "You may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate those last remains." Now, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night, by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows, oh God, how I loathed that thing. And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow. And I went on, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad, and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in. And I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake LaBarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a trice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then, "Here," said I, with a sudden cry, "is my crematorium." Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you seldom see. And I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so. And the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke and an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out, and they danced about, ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, "I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked." Then the door I opened wide, and there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile, you could see a mile, and he said, "Please close the door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plumtree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm." There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge. I cremated Sam McGee. of the great Jewish mystics and magicians and scholars, it is said that only one was able to summon death at will, and that one was King Solomon. Now, Solomon could not stop death's activities, but Solomon could summon death to his court. And this is what happened one day. An advisor came in to see Solomon, and the advisor was shaken. And Solomon said, "What is wrong?" The advisor said, "Your Highness, I have seen death in the marketplace, and death was staring at me." Solomon thought for a time and said, "I believe your time has come, but I can see only one possible means of escape. There is a city far from here, the city of Luz, and it is said that death cannot enter the gates of the city of Luz. If you leave now and ride on a horse as fast as you can, you might be able to reach the city of Luz by sunset." With that, he told the advisor how to get to the city. The advisor rode off on a horse, and Solomon summoned death to his palace. And Solomon said, "Death, what were you doing? Why did you scare my advisor so like that?" And Death spoke to Solomon and said, "I did not mean to frighten your advisor. But if the truth be known, it was he who shocked me in the marketplace, for I knew that I had an appointment to meet him today at sunset outside the gates of the city of Luz." Israel has all sorts of wonderful places and some creepy, strange places too, and magical places, places where you feel like you've traveled back in time. That's how it was in the city of Sfat, in the northern part of Israel. I had been visiting Sfat, though I wasn't actually staying in Sfat. I was staying in Mount Meron, which is just across the valley from Sfat. But between Meron and Sfat is a graveyard, and people who heard I was staying in one place visiting the other said, "Oh, whatever you do, don't walk through that graveyard at night." I said, "Why not?" They said, "Oh, you don't know. You don't know what they say about the dead in the graveyard?" They told me all sorts of stories, and their stories are fine and good, but I certainly didn't believe it. Yet, even though I didn't believe it, I always managed to get back from my visit to Sfat before it was dark. One day I ran into a friend in Sfat, and I stayed there talking, and the next thing I knew, it was getting late, and it was time to go back, and I didn't really want to walk across this graveyard alone. And sometimes when you don't want to do something, you procrastinate. And I stopped, I had something to eat, I took a little walk in Sfat, I went shopping a little bit, and by then it was really dark. And I saw no choice but to walk back through that valley alone. I paced back and forth just on the edge of town, not quite wanting to go alone, until I saw somebody who was walking from Sfat, seemed to be going through that valley. And I said, "Excuse me, you're walking to Meron? I'll join you." And so I walked with him. And on that walk all the way through that valley, past those gravestones, not a thing happened. Nobody jumped up to grab me. Nobody said boo. No chains rattling. Nothing. And we got to the other side, and absolutely nothing happened. And I turned to the man and I said, I want to thank you for joining me. I know this is silly, but, I've heard all the stories about the graveyard, and I was a little afraid. And the man looked at me and said, "I don't think it's silly at all. I used to feel the same way when I was alive." And now, Glimano Verde, the green hand of Rome. I remember my first job telling stories overseas. It was at a camp called Campo di Roma. What had happened was this. I'd sent away letters to all the different places I might want to work. And I waited by the mailbox for the returns to come. And after several weeks, I heard from a camp in Italy. And the letter came on beautiful stationery. And when I opened it up, it said, Caro Joel, we would like to invite you to come and tell stories at Campo di Roma. We have a small camp in the hills outside of Rome, but it is a very friendly camp. As it turns out, we need a storyteller, for our last storyteller had to leave suddenly. You'll be pleased to know that the salary for a summer spent at Campo di Roma is 1 million lira. Oh, that was all I had to hear. I was on the next plane, ready to go. 1 million lira, I was going to be a millionaire. I didn't know it came out to about $200. 1 million lira. That was a fortune. And while on the plane, I read the rest of the letter. We would love to have you come tell stories to our bambini. And by the way, do you know the story of the Green Hand? And it ended with a question mark. And I thought, no, I don't know the story of the Green Hand, but I love to go places and learn stories. That's what I do. So I arrived at the airport and took a bus out to the outskirts of Rome, and then took another bus out to this little village on the distant outskirts of Rome, up these dry and dusty hills. When I arrived, it was about sunset, and I hiked up this hill, and I saw the fireflies buzzing around, their lights going on and off. And as I turned around the corner, I saw this beautiful old pink villa. It was wonderful. It was like a dream. And I walked into it, and Signora Bonaventura came up to greet me. She was a small woman with white hair. She dressed in black, I think, because she was a widow, and her husband had died many years before. And she came to me and said, Joel, our storyteller, how wonderful to have you here. And she welcomed me there and made a meal, and we talked, and we ate, and we had all the kids come, and we had a great time at camp. Did all those camp sorts of things. For several weeks, it was just a great summer. Fun, games, travel, trips. And then, towards the end of the session, things began to turn strange. I remember one day, Signora Bonaventura came up to me and said, Joel, when will you tell the story of the Green Hand to the children? I said, well, I don't know the story. You asked in your letter if I knew it, but I don't know it. You don't know the story of the Green Hand? Glimano Verde? Ah, let me tell you. And this was the story she told. It happened here, in this very villa where we now sit. You see how this villa is a beautiful rose color, and it has been such for many years. It was built in the 1600s by an Italian count for his young wife, Rosa. And he built it for her and painted it this color in honor of her name. But then, sadly, the day after it was completed, she died, mysteriously. And out of grief, he too later died. And his final words were these: this villa must always remain rose-colored, in honor of my wife, Rosa. Ah, so it goes. And it happened that the villa stayed pink for years and years, until, in the late 1800s, a man bought it, and for some reason no one could explain, he thought he would paint it green. And he painted it a bright green color, the whole villa. And as he began to paint, it was a beautiful summer day like it is today. Yet the clouds came over, and a summer storm rolled in, and lightning struck. And he thought he would just finish painting a window, that window there on the second floor, you see it? And as he was painting it, lightning struck him. The shock from the lightning shattered the window, and as it fell, it cut off his hand. He began to bleed and fell back and died on the ground. He was gone, but the hand fell into the paint. And as it fell into the paint, perhaps It was the electricity of the lightning. Perhaps it was the chemicals in the paint. Perhaps it was a little of both. But it was not found. And what they say is this: that hand crawled out of that paint some days later and crawled away, and it has not been seen since. Yet it lives here somewhere. Can you tell that story to the children? I thought, sure, I can tell that story. I like that story. I can work on that. I can make up a lot of extra incidents about the hand doing this and the hand doing... I love to do stuff like this. I love to play with a story like that. So I had the story of the green hand, and I worked on it for the kids. And as I was working on it, preparing for Horror Week, which was the last week of camp, things began to happen. First, there was the fire. No one knew how it started, but there was a fire on the fields by the camp. And it spread almost to the camp, and we had all the kids out there fighting the fire. They finally put it out, exhausted, and went to sleep. They slept through the next day, and when they woke up, Stracciatelli was gone. Stracciatelli was a little kitten that we had at the camp. Stracciatelli is Italian for chocolate chip ice cream. It was a favorite little kitten, and it always slept in a little basket. And where Stracciatelli had been, there was a green handprint. The kids said, "Signora Bonaventura, dove è Stracciatelli? Where's Stracciatelli?" She said, "Oh, who knows? Things happen." The next day, we woke up, and Francesco was gone. Francesco was one of the favorite little campers. He was 5 years old, everyone's favorite. And I said, "Signora Bonaventura, dove è Francesco? Where's Francesco?" She said, "Oh, his parents came to get him." I said, "In the middle of the night? These things happen." "They left his luggage." "These things happen too." "But why is there a green handprint on his bed?" "Who knows? It's a mystery." Signora Bonaventura gathered me together and said, "Now, tonight is the night to tell all the children the story of the green hand." I said, "Okay, I like to do that." And I got them all together and told it to them, and they were all excited and scared. Nobody wanted to leave the main room. And she said, "This is the best part. Now, we'll go meet the green hand." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "We'll go to the cave where the green hand lives." I said, "Signora Bonaventura, you never told me this part of the story." She said, "Oh, yes, I forgot. You will be the green hand." "Me?" "Yes, you." "How do you figure?" "Joel, what we do is this. You dress in black. I tell the children you must go away into town, but you go hide in the cave. Your hand will be painted green. You hide behind a rock in an old Etruscan cave. It's just a few steps down. And then, when the kids come out to see the green hand, they'll see you. Your hand will be painted green." Well, you know me. I can't resist something like this. So I said, "Okay, I could go for that, sure." And so I said, "Sorry, kids, gotta go. You have a good time at Horror Night." I went off. I dressed in black. I painted my hand green, climbed down into the cave behind a rock, and waited for all the kids. At sunset, they came, and it was a summer day, but it was a little humid, which was unusual for Rome. And in fact, it started kind of a light rain. The kids came holding candles to look into the cave, and I sat there waiting. As I waited there in the cave, and it got dark, I heard the kids coming and saying, "Mano verde, green hand, dove mano verde?" And I waited till they were all there looking in the cave. I waited a long time. And then I reached my hand up above the rock, and I heard gasps from the kids. And then, with one green finger, I pointed at the children, different ones, and I could hear them stepping back and saying, "Mamma mia, che cosa?" It was fun. I didn't stop there. I shook my hand, and I made the shape of a claw. I heard screams from the kids, and then I heard one of them say, "Dove Joel? Where's Joel?" Suddenly, the game was up. They all said, "Joel, Joel! Hey, Joel, mano verde, Joel!" I was caught. It's like a magician who's caught in the middle of a trick. They all said, "Ciao, Joel!" And what could I do? I was caught. And now they took their candles and went off to have hot chocolate, leaving me in the cave, feeling a little silly that I'd been caught. And as I watched their candles disappear into the distance, that was when I felt something cold around my ankle. And it was holding on to me. And at first, I was too shocked to move, and it began crawling up the back of my leg, behind my knee. And as it crawled, I realized this must be some sort of animal or something. And as I turned to see what it was, I slipped and fell back down towards the cave, began sliding down, and I ended up in sort of a pit. And that thing crawled on my chest, and I felt it at my neck, and I reached over quickly as I could, and I grabbed it, and I threw it off. And it felt like flesh. It was cold. It was wet. I tell you, I had enough. I ran out of that cave. I ran back to the kitchen. I gathered the kids, and I said, the green hand got me, Glimano Verde. And I told them the whole thing. And they laughed. They said, Joel, tu è Glimano Verde. You're the green hand. And they pointed to my hand, which was painted green. I said, yes, I'm the green hand, but this was the real green hand. And I showed them the paint all over me. And they laughed. Not a one of them believed me. And I tried telling Signora Bonaventura. She didn't believe me either. She said, these things happen. That was the last night of camp. The next day we packed up our bags and went off, and the truth is, I had had just about enough of that camp. And I thought about that camp again some years later when I was again in Italy. I was telling stories up in Tuscany, and I thought, I wonder whatever happened to Campo di Roma. And so I took the bus down to Rome, and I went out to Campo di Roma, and I saw those fireflies again, and felt that warm Italian evening. And as I turned around the corner, the camp was gone. What remained were burnt-out buildings. It had been destroyed in a fire. And as I looked, I saw the room where I had slept. I saw the rooms where we had played. But it was gone. And now, on a whim, I wandered out of the camp back to that cave where I had hidden and played the green hand. And I looked around in the cave just to see what I might see there. Of course, I didn't see anything. But I had a flashlight and looked around one more time, and as I was about to go, I heard something scamper. And I turned, and my beam pointed right at it. And holding my beam on it, it seemed to be frozen. And I walked slowly towards it. In my backpack, I had some wet rags. And I placed them over it and wrapped it up and tied a string around it and wrapped it up in more rags and wrapped it up in a box and tied it with tape. I'll tell you, that thing was difficult to get through customs. Yet, it was worth it, because I now consider it a friend. I take it with me most everywhere I go. Would you like to meet it?
Yes.
This is the green hand. I find it quite friendly and, if you must know, have come to enjoy it a lot. But the one problem is, it's a bit slippery. I hope you've enjoyed the stories you've heard today, and perhaps some of you found them frightening. Maybe some are like my old friend Dirk and never get scared at all. But for those who do get afraid, I want to leave you with these words of my great, great, great grand uncle Ralph. They were his last words, as it were, and he said this: just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean that the world really isn't out to get you.